All right, guys, so today we're gonna go ahead and start practicing on how to draw a nose. As far as size-wise, I'm just gonna remind you because I kind of already covered this with this class, but just so that way it gets recorded on the video, don't draw it smaller than about 3 inches, 3.5 inches if you're comparing it to your hand, somewhere about maybe the length of one of your fingers. Don't use the pinky because I can tell you that that's gonna be a little bit small. Try to use like the index finger or that one of the other fingers, okay? That's just a little bit longer. So as far as the start on this of what you're gonna do for the nose, and again, I'll do what to do and then what not to do over here because there are several mistakes that I tend to see when people try to attempt to draw a nose. First off bat, first step, again, you can write your steps on the side if you choose to. I'm not going to, but it's, you know, if you need a cheat sheet for later to know the steps, go ahead and do that for yourself. We're going to start off with the round part of the bottom of the nose. So remember, we always want to break things up into shape. Okay, so if I'm going to break it up into shape, I'm going to pay attention to the ball of the nose where it is at the highest point of our face. So at this time, I'm going to draw this again, the top part of the bridge of the nose and so forth is going to be up here a little bit higher. And I will tell you guys that if you're going to be drawing any kind of line for this, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to draw only the bottom part of the nose. So first off, you just draw a little circle, keep it as light as possible so that way you don't have to do too much erasing. And then on the bottom part, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to pay attention, of course, to who you're drawing. But since we're drawing a generic nose right now, I'm just going to go ahead and just emphasize the bottom part of my nose. And then right off the bat, we need to concentrate on the opening of the nose. Now, here's some of the mistakes that I've seen before you even attempt that. So this is usually what I see. I'll have people where they'll draw the bottom and yeah, it's a good shape. I can compare it to what we see on the picture. But then right away, they want to do a whole circle for the nostril. And the thing is, guys, is that the nostril itself is a cavity that opens up. We don't see the bottom line defined unless it's part of the quality of the person, because some do have like a little wrinkle and a crease on the bottom, but that's not the majority. The majority of the people, when you're looking at them dead straight, which is what we're going to be concentrating on for this particular portrait, you go up, you go around, and you're only going to draw that original line that it just doesn't close. So we're only going to draw it up to maybe about right here the most. Okay. Same thing for the opposite side. So I'm going to take it around. I'm going to concentrate, of course, on the shape of the person that you're drawing, of course. So if it's a different shape, you're going to have to follow that shape, but it usually does not close all the way. It only shows the shadow maybe up to about right here. So if we're going to draw another part of the actual nose structure, the line of it, the only other part that you would see is the very edge of the nostril. So I'm only going to draw, and I'm just, like I said, I'm drawing a generic shape depending on the person you're drawing. It might come a little bit further down, you know, the crease is a little bit more. For the majority of the people, guys, there tends to be space in between because this part of the nostril is a flap of skin that connects to the top as well as down to the bottom. It also connects over here, but the reason why we draw the line on the side is because it does create a dark shadow for the way that it actually comes out from the face. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to connect the lines. I'll leave a little bit of space and I'll kind of draw just a random shape of what I would think the side of a nostril would look like. Again, I'm not looking at anybody, but if I was, I would concentrate on the contour of that person because sometimes it's a little bit wider of a nose. So it's going to have more of a round shape over here. Sometimes it's more of a narrow nose, so it would have less of a round shape, but I'm drawing the norm as far as the general public. Okay, so at this time, just be aware that this is the only amount of outline that you're drawing for the nose. Now, is there a way of knowing the exact size to the person's face? Yes, but that will come when I instruct you guys on how to put the full face together, when we do it all. Right now, we're just concentrating on the nose only. So this is why I'm telling you that as far as the outline is concerned, this is the only part that you're going to draw for an outline. The rest is all shading. And that's usually where people mess up. They want to draw the lines right here on the side of the nose. Like that's the first thing that I see. And this is what not to do. This is not correct. It's a mistake. because nobody has lines on the sides of their noses. It's all transition. That part comes up, and to give the illusion that that part of the face comes up, it's all shading. If you wanted to draw lines just as a guide, they should not be this dark. I've had people before where they'll draw just to kind of get a more or less shape, and they keep it real light. So as they start their shading, they know how far to go. That's a different story. If you wanted to do this, that's okay, because look how light my line is. When I start adding the transitions, that's going to disappear. It's not going to be an actual line. Okay. So now at this point, I'm going to start the shading, so that way you guys know how the shading should properly be for a nose. And right now I'm going to concentrate with the ball of the nose, because I have my circle based off of here. So what I'm going to do is, with circular motion, I'm going to go ahead and put the shadow on this side, because if we're looking at this as a ball of the nose, the sphere, when we shade, this is usually, at least from when we have the light coming, like I said, in this direction, that's usually the direction I tend to draw from when it comes to just anything. Like if I'm going to draw a sphere or whatever, that's my go-to side. Can you do it from the opposite side? Yeah, if your photograph that you're working from, the actual shading of the face is on this side, like the highlight comes from that side, then of course the shadow is going to be on this side. But because this is my go-to side, I'm going to go ahead and put as if the shadow were here. So I do need to put a grade down here on the bottom, because usually the bottom of the nose curves down. So I should see some kind of shadow come down this way. I will take this up just a little bit. I'm not going to take it as far as the opposite side, just because if you guys know that when a nose, it's not a perfectly round shape, it starts to connect up here on top. So I'm going to erase some of this line over here that's on the top, just because I'm going to change the shape a little bit after that. Okay. So at this time, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this gray up, because I know the side of my nose. I have the bridge of my nose here. And since my light's coming on this side, I know for sure that I have a shadow on this side. This is where I tell you, some people will draw that super light line, and that's fine if you want to, but it's not necessary, because if I just take this gray that I have over here on this side, if I just take it up, then automatically I'm going to create my bridge of the nose with having a shadow on one side. And then there's going to be a highlight here in the middle. So I'm going to avoid that right now. I'm just taking it up to the side. I'm going to curve it just a little bit more on the top half, because if you guys know, like when you look at a nose, it tends to get a little bit more narrow from the top down. So this is why I'm taking it just a little bit beyond. And then I'm still going to bring this gray up as well, just like I did on that side, but I'm going to try my best and see, I kind of already got a little dark there. I want to get a little bit lighter than I did on the other side. So if I can't get it any lighter than this, which you should be able to, like if I were to take the back of my pencil, if I take my eraser and I just tap it lightly, I can just correct this by just going like this and just tapping that one spot here. And of course, turning my eraser as I'm doing this, because it's going to get dirty once I take off some of it, and I don't want to smudge. So I wanted to keep it look like it's shaded. So I'm just going to go ahead and just try my best to even that out just a little bit, extend it just a tiny bit, but you notice that it does get more narrow towards the top. It's a little bit more extended towards the bottom. And I think my paper, if I'm correct, my paper is actually messed up there. That's why this is happening. But to correct it, if that happens, you just go ahead and tap it, okay, to remove. Now, they're still too similar. So I'm actually going to go on the opposite side. I'm going to darken this side just a little bit more, just so that way I see a difference between the two sides. If the grays are too much the same, it will look very, very flat, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and darken this gray just a little bit more. If you can see the difference between the two sides, then you're good, okay? So now at this time, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to, because I'm not done just yet on the bridge, but I want to start already developing the bottom part of the nose. Can you choose to do this first before you do this other side? Yes, that is possible, okay? But I'm going to just do this just because I want to start seeing it more developed. Now, on these parts of the nostrils, what you want to do is, if you pay attention to how things actually come up from the face, usually the nose does this. It goes like this, it goes down a little bit, and then it comes back up. So I need to have highlights on this part to make it look and give the illusion that this part of the nostril is coming up. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a little shadow down here on the bottom only. So if you pay attention to the shape that I'm doing the shadow, I'm trying to stick close to this original line while still making sure that it blends over here. And I'm going to come this way and just bring it down to this way. I'm also going to create, because it goes around to this side. Remember how we had originally our sphere? It's round on this side. So I do need to have a little bit of this gray also come on this side of it. I just don't want to lose the highlight that will give the illusion that my nostril is starting to flare up. So what I'll do is start to transition this gray to just a lighter gray, and then just make sure that I transition it to where it gets light towards the center of my nostril. So once I have that complete, like on this side, I'm just going to mimic the same thing, like make sure that this gray also kind of transitions to this gray that we have over here. Just want to make sure that it looks complete. We'll be shading a little bit beyond here, but right now I just want to make sure that it does connect somewhere, okay? I'm going to go ahead and also do the same thing to this side, but when you're doing the grays, remember to stay just a little bit lighter, because my light is coming from this side. This gray needs to be just a little bit darker than whatever gray is on this side of the nose. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to make sure that I bring this around. So remember, it's the bottom part, because it goes in, it curves. So in order to get that illusion that it curves, I have to make sure that I do that. Now, this line for me looks a little too dark. So even before I start the shading, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lighten up that line just a little bit, because this is the side that the light hits. So for me, I don't want it too dark. I want to make sure I start it off light. So as I start my shading on this, it's going to be a little bit easier for me to stick to this gray that's over here. Remember, the gray is supposed to connect. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to make sure that I put that little shadow right here off to the edge. Make sure that I got a little shadow here. And the most important part is that right here in the center, I don't lose that highlight. Okay. So I'm just going to bring this gray and I'm going to transition it. And just make sure that this area here for my nostril stays the lightest part so that it looks 3D. Now, this little spot got a little too dark, so just with my eraser, but I think it's because for some reason, this particular paper is a little damaged on this section and right here where I tried to shade. So if that happens to you, just use your eraser, but you're not erasing completely. You're going to tap it. It's like a backwards transition. If you think about it, guys, you're going to tap it until you get to the gray that you want. Okay. So now we're not done with the bridge just yet. I still need my shadows and stuff on the bottom of the nose, but we're going to go ahead and start cleaning up the bridge just slightly. So what I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to take this gray and I'm going to make sure that it transitions to the white that should be at the very highlight of my nose. I really shouldn't have white here. It should be like a light gray. The only part that you'll see white is maybe if like my nose was either a little sweaty, or you know how like sometimes you get a little bit shiny. Like I know my skin is shiny because it is a little oily. So when I have my skin, I'll see like little highlights. Those are the only parts that you really want to leave white. Other than that, it should be shaded. So I'm just going to take this in. I'm going to make sure that I get lighter towards the area. Think, like I said, think of it like a sphere. Now, if you have a very flat nose, like you don't have a very rounded off nose, then it's going to be more gray than anything. You know, you're not going to necessarily have too much movement in the transitions. But if that's not the case, if you don't have a flat nose, you need to make sure that you guys are fixing the transitions. Because like I said on Monday, when I was going over the eyes, when I was noticing the way people were transitioning on this last assignment, people are forgetting the circular motion and it's not coming out as smooth as it should be. You need to see the movement from dark to light. And if you don't see that transition, then it's just not going to look 3D. And that's the whole point of this, is to learn how to draw more realistic first. And then if you want to like study abstract art or things like that, you want to play with it, that's fine, because you've already proved yourself on knowing the skill of what you need to do for drawing, okay? So this doesn't have a lot of movement, so I'm just gonna darken this just a little bit, just so that it does show. And if I feel like, okay, well now this gray looks too similar, then you go back and darken the opposite side, okay? So I'm just gonna concentrate on making sure that I work my way. My highlight, like if I am going to leave a highlight, let's say this is a person who is a little bit sweatier or they just have oils on their skin that shows that super bright highlight. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it like right here. So the rest of this, I am going to just deepen that gray just slightly. Right here, it got a little too dark, so I'm just gonna touch that. And you know, honestly, like this for me looks just a tiny bit flat. So I'm gonna extend this shadow just a little bit. If you like the way yours looks, leave it alone. But I'm gonna go ahead and just because I want a little bit more 3D look, I'm gonna darken this just so I see the difference between these areas here. And then I'll just go back and I'll darken this side just a little bit more so I get the definition and the variety of grays. So at this point, what I want to make sure that I do now is the nostrils, the part where it is the darkest of the face. And that's what's really going to make your nose look like a nose. That's what's going to make it pop. I have people do this wrong all the time. So make sure you're paying attention to this part, because I always get that one student who wants to just go and completely fill it in solid black. It's not a hole in your face, guys. It is a cavity. It's almost like, think of it like a cave, where because the skin is covering the light, you know, you do have that dark spot inside, but it should have transition, not flat like this, okay? This is what's gonna make your nose look more 3D. So the only part that you're really gonna want very dark, again, it's different with everybody, depending on the person that you're drawing, is going to be from this area to this area, because we're drawing, like I said, a generic shape. The majority is usually going to have this, so this is why we're drawing it like this for right now for the practice. But you should draw, like I had said in the last video, you should draw what you guys see. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start my shadow real dark right here because it should cast a dark shadow. But then as I move my way down, I want to do the circular motion, and I also want to pick up the transition so that way it goes dark to light towards the bottom area here, okay? And you can already see that that's starting to pop. Like if I cover this side of the nose, it's starting to pop way more than on that side of the nose, okay? So I'm gonna do the same thing to this side. It's only gonna be from here. So somewhere about right here is where I'm gonna darken the line. And I'm gonna come around and I'm only gonna do it to about right here at the most. And then the rest is just gonna be transitioned down. So circular motion. And then just bring it down and pick up the pressure so that way you get the variety of grays and you get that little transition. Depending on who you're drawing, and I know I've repeated myself over and over, but it's true. Depending on who you're drawing will determine the shape of this that you're doing it and how dark you're doing it on the top. Maybe in your picture that you chose to do, you see it a little bit lighter. So that just depends on the person, okay? Now at this point, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I am going to also create a darker gray because we want this part to look like it's coming up. So I'm gonna, for the most part, some people, or the majority of the people, you will see the bottom. Sometimes it'll actually be like a connection, but in the generic nose that we've drawn in the past, you know, where it still looks realistic, we're gonna put a lighter gray because we still have to cast a shadow, but it's not gonna be as dark as this because it's not a hole. It actually connects, so it's not gonna cast that much of a shadow, but we're gonna go ahead and bring this down a little bit. And we'll just make sure that it transitions because we want to plant the nose on something. We don't want it to look like it's just floating there. So we want to give it some stability. I'm just going to make sure that it connects somewhere about right here. The other thing that I do want you guys to know is that eventually when we draw the mouth on the next time I see you guys, I will be talking about the highlights that we usually have here on the upper lip area, but we're not going to do that right now. All we're going to do is just extend a little bit of the shadow coming downward here, like I said, so we can plant the nose and it doesn't look like it's just floating there. So we're just gonna lift the transition right here in the middle at least, okay? Now, we also want to make it a little bit more realistic by bringing up a little bit of the actual nostril. So we're gonna give it just a little bit more dimension by putting just a little bit more of a gray on the back side of this, kind of like the same gray we did here. And then we're gonna just do a little bit of a laugh line. Now I'm gonna draw a very light line as a guide. I'm doing it light because it's not gonna be a line, it's gonna be transition. And then what I'm gonna do is I am going to take this gray and I'm just going to transition it towards the laugh line. Some people have it a lot deeper than others. You know, if you smile a lot, people tend to get their wrinkles here. And so that laugh line will be more strong. But you know, if I'm not one to smile too much, or I mean, maybe it's just genetics and that's just the way it is in the family, that's fine too. But just so that way the nostril starts to pop, we're gonna add a little bit of grays right here. And then as well as just a little tiny bit up just on the top, just to where it'll actually transition to whatever gray I have over here on the top, okay? But we're just gonna lightly bring the transitions and just to make sure that it connects up here to this gray. Just so it goes somewhere. This little spot for me got a little dark, so I do have to tap it lightly because I shouldn't have that little tiny line. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on the opposite side. So I'm just gonna draw a little super light line just as a guide. So I know I kind of have them in the same spot, more or less. Remember, this is a practice. So if it's not coming out exactly in the same shape, that's okay, all right? And then what I'll do is I'll just do the gray towards the back side of this, just a little tiny bit darker. And I'm just going to extend it outward. Kind of like I'm trying to concentrate on this gray. Now this side might be just slightly darker just because we originally did the shadow a little bit darker on this part of the nostril. If you feel, well, I'll just pick up the shadow here, well then pick up the shadow there if you felt like you got too dark. I did okay. Like I think I can get away with just bringing this just a little slightly darker of a line. And it'll still, like I can just transition very quickly just so I can still pick it up and not get too dark. Because this part of the gray, guys, should not be as dark as this. This is going to be the darkest spot on the face because it is a cavity. It's something that opens up. Okay, so because of that, I just need to be very careful. If this looks too dark, then just lighten some of this in order to be able to see the difference between the two. Now, when we originally did the eye, this is another way you can do it. Remember when we did the eye and I was talking about the little highlight that sometimes hits on the side of things that are rounded and so forth, or just any kind of contour. If you want to do it like this is another option of doing it. If you feel like I don't want to get too dark, but I like the gray I have here, I don't want to change it, then this is an option. Just leave a little highlight on that edge and then you can kind of mimic the same gray that you have here. And then of course, just make sure that it transitions out a little bit. Now to finish this off, because it already looks like a nose, you know, at least the structure of a nose. To finish this off, the only thing I'm going to ask for you guys to do is to make sure that this gray does transition out a little bit more. So take it out, like as far as how much of the nose that you guys should have drawn is, and I'll take it out so you can see how, at what distance, because it has to go from dark to light back up again to give the illusion that it is attached to the cheek area. So this is something that you guys should practice a little bit too before we start with our final. So I'm gonna just extend some of the transitions a little bit, just make sure that it goes somewhere. Remember that when we start drawing the full face, because how I was talking about the eye, we have like the tear duct and all that stuff over here. So this is eventually gonna get, when I was talking about those grays that are on the sides of the eye, it's gonna be connected to that. So it would go in this, and you know, like, well, later I'll show you guys about the eyebrows and all that stuff when we get to that part, but we're not there yet. But if you wanna just kind of practice already placing the transitions where it goes dark to light towards those little areas, go for it, okay? But you should at least have about this much of what I'm showing you here on the practice. You know, I will tell you that depending on the person too, sometimes they have a little shadow right here in between. And this is almost everybody, because like if I'm looking at myself in the mirror right now, to give the illusion that the nose is going out, like it goes into the face and then it comes out to the forehead, you should have a little tiny bit of a shadow that is going to be casted right here in between. And this is what, like I said, it's going to attach your nose to your face. So it's important for you to practice this. But usually we have a little bit of the gray. So I'm just going to kind of mimic the gray that I see around here. And then this will transition to the bridge of my nose. So I have to make sure that I just put a little bit of transition right here. I don't want to extend it too much because I don't want it to seem like that cavity is very large, but I do need to make sure that it transitions to the bridge, okay? So I'm going to have a little bit of transition here, and then I'll also have a little bit of transition going up to where it connects to the forehead. Now, if I'm looking at this for me, like if I'm going to be very critical, I would go back and I would actually, because the light's coming from the side of the face, I would actually go and I would extend the shadowing. So if you have the time to be able to make it look a little bit more realistic, just to practice for your final, start kind of pushing some of those shadows. So I would push the shadow, like if I'm being critical on my work and I say, nah, you can do this a little bit better. I would go back and I would extend some of the shadow work on the side of the nose here on this side to make it look like it's actually really coming out just slightly more than it is. Okay, I mean, that would be like the only thing that I would do different if I'm, doing, just to give it a little bit more 3D look. And then I would do the same thing like just right here, because I do want to make sure that I don't lose on the nose, that, it gets a little bit more narrow on the top, that it tapers off. Okay. So if I can extend some of that little shadow work, I will. But I don't want to connect it either. You don't want to make a perfect triangle. That's another thing you got to make sure you avoid, okay? It's all about transition. We're not doing anything with hard lines. The only part that has hard line is the bottom of the nose, and that is it. Everything else is all transition on the nose. Don't do lines on the side of your face if you're not going to transition it out. It's better just to take right off the bat the transition up, like when you're doing the grays, rather than doing a hard line, okay? So this is the correct way of doing it. You guys should at least draw and try to practice too. If you wanna exaggerate the highlights and leave more white just to see the difference and how it would look versus, as far as what you guys are going to do for your final, go for it. Because if you wanna exaggerate it and you like the way it looks, that's something that you can incorporate in your final that it might not have, okay? Size wise, like I said, don't do it any smaller. Here it's like a little bit bigger than 3 if you're counting like the top part and then also some of this. So somewhere about 3 inches or more, guys, if you're not sure, like my hands are pretty, small or whatever. So, I mean, it's probably just a little bit bigger than my fingers. So don't do them too small, because if you're drawing small, that means that you're not concentrating on the detail. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video there.